Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the second day of the 2019 Sloat Sports Analytics Conference, Competitive Advantage Talks, presented by Ticketmaster. My name is Jason Rayhout. I am a first-year MBA student here at MIT Sloan, and it's my pleasure to introduce our next presentation, Scrolling is the New Channel Surfing, How Twitter Ads Drive TV Ratings. Our next presenter is Omar Ajmeri. He is a research analyst at Twitter and the co-founder and CEO of Slants. Please join me in welcoming Omar.
All right, thank you for the introduction. Really excited to be here at Sloan and excited to talk to you guys a little bit about how Twitter ads drive TV ratings. So first off, if everyone could just pull out your phones, just go ahead, everybody, pull out your phones. I see some of you already ahead of the game in this regard, but go ahead and go to menti.com, MENTI.com, and use the code 762277. And I want you guys to vote in this poll. When you think of sports on Twitter, what's the first thing that you think of? Again, that code is 762277. Give you guys a few seconds here. All right, a lot of people for breaking news. Cool, well, the purpose of this exercise was basically to show there's such a wide range of use cases for Twitter and sports. It's a really symbiotic relationship, and there's so many use cases that people use and come to the platform for every single day. Thanks everybody for voting. One thing that I think gets kind of underrated in the grand scheme of usage of Twitter and sports is driving TV viewership. So first off, high level, just to talk a little bit about why this is important. Viewers drive TV ratings, and TV ratings drive advertisers, and advertisers drive revenue. So if you go back to 1997, 20% of the league revenue for the NFL was driven by TV. Now, fast forward 20 years later, and that number is all the way up to 50%. So these media rights are extremely important, and these are worth billions of dollars every year. And you're probably wondering, okay, you're the NFL, you have such an established brand. Every Sunday is football Sunday. Do you even need to advertise? Well, the reality of the situation is that it's never been more important to advertise than in this day and age, just because there's so much competition for your attention. So you have social platforms like Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat that people are spending a ton of time on. You have your media platforms like Netflix, Amazon Prime, HBO, just anytime you want, you can get access to really great content. You have your competition with your other sports leagues. So, should I watch this NFL game, or should I watch an NBA game, or an MLB game, or NHL? And then there's also been this huge rise in esports. So with titles like Fortnite or Overwatch, it's just a huge influx of new gamers and even viewers of gamers with YouTube and Twitch. And so if you're a TV network or you're a league, you really have no shortage of avenues to choose from when you're looking to drive viewership. So a few different ones here. You have your mainstream media outlets, which would be your TV, owned and paid, as well as radio, those commercials that you see all the time. You have your social media outlets such as YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, etc. And then you have other digital outlets like Google, ESPN, and some popular podcasts. But I'll talk a little bit about why social media has some distinct advantages. So first off, let's talk about scale. So the ability to reach tens of millions of people on a daily basis for these platforms is massive. It's so powerful. And then from a targeting standpoint, I think this is one of the best features as well. If you think about it in comparison to TV, there's just so many more dimensions that you can target off of than television. So if you can imagine, let's say I'm watching the Redskins-Eagles Monday night game at my house. I'm a 26-year-old male, and let's say my next-door neighbor is a 95-year-old grandma. We're going to be watching the same exact ads, right? And for an advertiser, that's not ideal. They want to tailor their messaging appropriately and serve each audience specifically. So on platforms like Twitter, like Facebook, you're able to target demographically, target based off of interests, behaviors, etc. Next up is measurement. So for many, many years now, ratings have been king for TV. That's pretty much the only metric that matters for almost all of these advertisers and shows. Now, on platforms like Twitter and Facebook, you're able to get really granular breakdowns on the type of data that you can get. So you can look at things like, how many impressions did my media drive? How many unique people did I reach? How many people engaged with my content? If it was a video, how many people watched that video? How many people completed that video? There's just no shortage of metrics to look at and analyze, and it makes for a really powerful component as well of social media. Next up, cost effective. So going back to the scale a little bit, you're able to reach tens of thousands of people, even millions, with literally dollars. So again, a really powerful component there. Automated tools, I won't go into too deep, but with things like real-time bidding, you don't have to really do any work once you set up your campaigns. It just kind of does everything automatically for you. And finally, organic growth. So if you can imagine a channel like Sunday Night Football on NBC. Let's say they're promoting their content, they want people to watch that game. Now, if I see that content, and I'm seeing some cool highlights, some cool interviews that they're promoting, I might think, you know what, why don't I just follow that account? And that way, instead of having to be reached by paid media, in the future I'll just be reached by organic media, and I won't need to pay to reach that user in the future. So I'll talk a little bit about how we would measure this media on Twitter previously. So about a year and a half ago, the best way to measure this would be through an on-platform survey. So if you can imagine, you have your overall target audience, and it would be split up into two groups. So 90% would be the people exposed to the campaign, and 10% of that target audience would be in an unexposed control group. Now, we would have a promoted tweet, something like this from Twitter survey saying, please answer a few quick questions. And one of those questions could be something like, do you intend to tune in to this matchup? So both groups would get the same survey, and then something on the right would be our output, which would be intent to tune in for a control versus exposed. Now, inherently, there are a few problems with a metric like intent to tune in, specifically for sports viewership. So if you think about it, let's say you get an ad from the NBA, and it's about a Warriors-Rockets game next Tuesday. And you could say, you know what, Warriors-Rockets, that's one of the best matchups of the year. I'm definitely going to watch that. Next Tuesday comes around, and you totally forgot it's your best friend's birthday. You're not watching that game, right? You may have signaled that you're going to intend to tune in, but it's wrong. Similarly, let's say you get that same ad for Warriors-Rockets, and let's say you're like me. You're a sad, downtrodden Wizards fan, and you just have a bad taste in your mouth about basketball. You see the ad, you're like, you know what, it's a good matchup, but I just don't really want to watch basketball. So you say you're not going to tune in. Tuesday comes around, you're laying there on your couch, scrolling through channels, and you see Warriors-Rockets on. You might end up watching that. You might want to watch James Harden torch Steph Curry over and over again. So again, inherently, the intent to tune in metric, it just isn't as valuable as it could be. Which is why, with the rise of smart TVs, there was an opportunity to do more sophisticated analysis. So we work with a few different tune-in vendors, one of which is Samba TV, which I'll talk about. But basically what they do is they have computer vision technology that overlays on smart TVs to understand viewership patterns and behaviors. So the way it works is they work with something like 10 to 12 different television providers, and they basically have an opt-in, which allows you to basically have your TV viewership measured. So the way this would work on our end with Twitter would be, let's say you're scrolling through Twitter, you see an ad for Redskins versus Eagles, and then if you're on the same Wi-Fi network as that smart TV, that's how they tie in the devices. So again, if I'm on Twitter, I'm scrolling through, I see that Redskins-Eagles ad, and then I actually convert and watch on my smart TV, that's how we would measure tune-in this instance. So to talk to you a little bit about how we set these up and how it all works is first we would build that target audience. So we'd work with the creative agency, the media agency, and then also people on Twitter's end to determine what that target audience should be. Are you targeting casual fans? Are you targeting core fans of the sport, or tangential things? Next up would be developing that holdback. So similar to the old view, we would have 90% in the exposed group and 10% in the control to understand and evaluate the differences between the two groups. Next up, we would query the exposed and held back users. So these would be two massive data files where we would look at all of the hashed mobile device IDs who were exposed in the campaign and all of them that were held back. And the next step would be developing the mapping document. So this is actually the most interesting part of the whole process, but we're actually able to see exactly the type of tweets that each person was exposed to and understand different data cuts that the client wants to see. So for example, going back to that Redskins versus Eagles game, let's say there was a bunch of different creative units that featured Carson Wentz, and there were a bunch of creative units that featured Chris Thompson, running back from the Redskins. We can actually break out and see what's the tune-in rate and conversion for people who saw the Carson Wentz ad versus the Chris Thompson ad. And that's just one of the many data cuts that we can get. A few of the others would be something like, does video content perform better than photo content? Or does the shorter 30-second video do better than the minute-long video? There's all sorts of different data cuts that we can map out and break out, and this makes for really powerful analysis. Next up would be sending all of that data over to Samba or another tune-in vendor, and they would match the device IDs to their smart TVs, and finally analyze performance in a report and break out what happened, how did it happen, and what are future recommendations for additional campaigns. So we had a really great case study last year with the NHL for the Stanley Cup playoffs. So we had a couple of Western Conference Finals games, I believe, and a couple of Finals games as well, and we saw some really amazing results. So there was actually a 40% lift in verified tune-in rate, or VTR, for each of the 4 playoff matchups, which is a pretty astounding number. And I think there are a couple reasons of why it was so successful, namely the targeting and the creative, which we'll get to in the next slide. But before we get there, there was also a 2x lift in tune-in focused on Golden Knights fans. And this was a really interesting learning, and I think intuitively it made sense. Because if you think about Golden Knights fans, it's a brand new team. They don't have that established fan base yet. So we're thinking that, okay, a lot of these guys, I don't want to call them bandwagon fans, but if the home team is doing really well, they might decide to tune into a game. And if they see a tweet that reminds them, hey, make sure you tune into this game, everybody's talking about this game, it might lead to a higher conversion. And that's what we saw in the results here. And we also saw that 1 to 2 exposures drove the highest lift in VTR across the board for this campaign. And so typically in any Twitter campaign, we recommend about 5 to 6 exposures is really that sweet spot in terms of driving brand metrics or tune-in. Just because Twitter's a really fast-moving platform. You're scrolling through all your content. You might not make the most mark with just that 1 or 2 exposures, but in this campaign, just 1 or 2 was really, really effective. And I think the creative did a great job of showcasing this. So here are a couple of examples from the campaign. If you look at the tweet on the left, I'll just read this to you. Golden Knights versus NHL Jets, Western Conference Final, let's go. Game 1 tonight at 7 Eastern on NBC. So right away, you know exactly who's playing, what the stakes are, what time the game is, and what channel it's at. So again, because it's a really fast-moving platform, it's really important to be as direct and concise as possible. So even if you see that ad once, it can really make that mark and drive that memory encoding for any user. Also, in the image itself, it's an eye-catching unit, it's pretty interesting, and they have all that information below in the media as well. Also, I'll play this video for you that they ran in the finals with the Caps versus the Knights.
The Stanley Cup Final begins tonight on NBC.
So again, really strong creative here. The copy itself tells you everything you need to know. And the video asset is compelling. It has the music, it has the highlights, it has all the information at the end, and it's not too long. A lot of times, for a user, if they see a minute-long or a 2-minute-long video, they might be turned off, they might not be interested in watching that video. But if you keep it short, under 30 seconds, under 15 seconds, you can get a lot of people to watch that video and actually convert them to tune in. Keeping up with what's happening is another really important tactic. So the NHL was able to capitalize on both an engaged hockey audience as well as the casual fan by taking advantage of that real-time conversation. So I don't want to go too into detail about the NHL specific targeting strategy, but I have some mock examples below for how the NFL could have targeted users for the AFC Championship game between the Chiefs and the Patriots. So if you think about it, a lot of times leagues and networks, they basically have 2 goals. They want to drive their core fans to watch, which they probably will anyways, and that's only going to be like a smaller subset of that budget. And then the larger budget will be around the casual fan. So people who might not be the biggest fans, they maybe only catch a few games a year, but if you can get them to tune in, that's a win. So if you have followers of players like Mahomes or Gronkowski, a lot of times those are, really popular players, and probably all core casual fans are following them. But for players like Tyreek Hill or Julian Edelman, they're probably a little more specific. They're a little more for that core fan. So that's just an example of how you could break out the targeting. And even for handles like the NFL and NBA, pretty much everybody follows them, whether you're a core or a casual fan. So that's another way you can target that casual fan. Keyword targeting is really effective as well. So, people on your timeline talking about who's the MVP, they're talking about Giselle, they're talking about who's the GOAT, all sorts of things like this I think can be really valuable in terms of a keyword targeting strategy. And finally, from a tangential standpoint, there's also opportunities for things like basketball, where there's a huge overlap between the NBA viewing audience and the NFL viewing audience. So if you can target followers or people talking about LeBron and Steph Curry and Jordan Spieth, you can probably get a lot of those casual fans to maybe redirect their attention and tune into a huge game like the AFC Championship. So in terms of future targeting opportunities, I think this is a really powerful application of working with a tune-in vendor like Samba as well. So what we're able to do, going back to that Redskins versus Eagles example, we're able to see, okay, for all the people who watched this program, what else were they watching and what else did they over-index on, right? So you might have your more obvious things like the NBA or Game of Thrones, but maybe there's a huge subset of that population that's watching The Patriot Act with Hassan Minhaj. Or maybe there's a huge subset of people watching The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, underrated TV show. So those kinds of opportunities, I think, can be really effective for any future targeting on TV and Twitter. So if you think about it for the next year, maybe the NFL incorporates Hassan Minhaj into their NFL commercials on TV. Or maybe on Twitter, they look at followers of him or people talking about the Patriot Act. All sorts of these things can really help improve targeting in future campaigns. I want to walk you through a couple of other interesting best practices here. So number one, heart for reminder. Pretty straightforward and self-explanatory, but essentially this is an NBA on TNT ad. If you like that tweet, you'll actually receive a one-to-one private tweet directed at you the day of that game saying, hey, make sure to tune in to the NBA game tonight. We've seen this work really well on a number of campaigns, and I think there are a few reasons for this. One is that one-to-one connection, I think is really powerful. When you see a brand like NBA on TNT replying to you directly, I think it makes you feel something, it gets you excited. And other than that, it's just a really timely reminder, so people know exactly when to tune in, where to tune in, and we've seen this tactic lead to some of the highest conversion rates. In-stream video, otherwise known as pre-roll video, is a great way to drive awareness and intent to tune in as well. So in this tweet here, you have Adrian Peterson runs right through the defense. That's an exciting tweet. I'm interested to watch that. So brands can actually throw a short 6-second clip right before this, which I'll play for you.
Titans, Steelers on NBC.
So as you can see, really short, less than 6 seconds, but even within that short video, you know exactly what's happening. It's Titans versus Steelers, Thursday Night Football, and it has a time as well. So really effective tactic there as well. And finally, whitelisting talent. So if you can just bear with me and imagine this fantasy scenario where I'm a hugely popular Twitter account. I'm like the Bill Simmons for the Washington Wizards. I have millions of followers, and so the NBA can actually whitelist my account and promote it to a whole range of users. So I can tweet something like this. Again, in my fantasy scenario, the Wizards are playing the Warriors in the NBA Finals, and the NBA can actually boost this tweet and promote it to millions of people.
Using it now. There's Steph Curry. Well, that's easy. By John Wall.
Did I say he was fast? And Curry took a look there. It slowed up.
So obviously, I put these slides together before John Wall got hurt, but prayers up for John, wishing him a speedy recovery. And that's all I got. Any questions? Yep. Sure. So I think it depends on the brand. You know, if you have a really established brand, you can kind of get away with longer video. But I would say in general, we try to recommend under 30, under 15 if you can swing it. So again, having all that branding and messaging early up front, and even having closed captions for anyone watching sound off, I think those are all really important tactics. Yep. Yeah, so the match rates differ, you know, based on, you know, whatever the account is, their brand is. I would say, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to exactly disclose the exact percentage, but it's basically between something like 0 to 10%. Yeah, that's a really good question, and that's that was one of the main concerns initially when we started working with Samba for a lot of the advertisers, especially for programs like regular cable TV shows. You know, maybe not a lot of smart TV users are watching those shows, so we might be like underrepresenting our own audience a little bit in that regard. But what we found that they're actually able to match and do like a demographic and, you know, some other sampling techniques to basically account for that and basically have it as close to the U.S. Census as possible. Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's not totally important. I think the closed captions are the most important thing because a lot of users are watching sound off. I don't have an exact percentage of what that rate looks like, but I mean, by and large, a lot of people are scrolling quickly. You know, they could be on the train, they could be in a meeting, you know, scrolling through Twitter. So a lot of people are watching sound off, so definitely important to have that sound off strategy. Yeah, so I would say the heart for reminder, that's probably been our #1 tactic for a lot of the tune-in campaigns. Again, just because that it's really timely and that one-to-one connection. I would say pre-roll, varying success. I think it really depends on the brand, depends on the show. But I think if you're able to put it in front of content that people want to watch and you're able to make that mark really quickly, it can be effective. But again, probably more mixed results than we see for the heart for reminder. And whitelisting, we've actually seen it as one of the top tactics as well. I think, you know, if you think about it, getting a tweet from, you know, like ABC, for example, is probably less interesting than getting a tweet from like Chrissy Teigen. So a lot of times we've seen that people are more engaged and more willing to watch content from celebrities and whitelisted talent than maybe just a brand. Wait, sorry, can you just elaborate on that question a little bit?
Yeah, of course. Like, if you have two conflicting events, you know, on broadcast television, how do you go about trying to pilfer viewers from one of those events to an event that you're advertising?
Got it. Yeah, so there are a few tactics that they can use to basically competitively target. So you can't exactly get like followers of the Oscar or whatever, the other TV show, but you can do some workarounds in terms of trying to capture that other audience. So you can actually import smart TV audiences and understand like who's viewing what and basically target the opposite, for example. But there's a few other ways you can do in terms of like interest-based, like for example, for the Oscars, if you do something like movie targeting and that kind of thing and basically build off of that, that's a good way you can try to attract that audience. Yeah, so we typically recommend for, just for your knowledge, for a TV show like a premiere, we would say around 2 weeks out, right, to build that anticipation and interest. For something like a sports game, it really varies, right? So if it's like a really big matchup and it's a playoff matchup, you can kind of get away with having the content later and later in the day. But for something like a regular season game, we would say even still like having a few days out is the best case scenario. In game, it's hard to get that sample and scale, and a lot of times there's a lot of organic content happening around that game anyways, so there's not always a big push during game, but we always say make sure you start at least a couple days out if possible. Yep. Yeah, so different advertisers have different thresholds for tune-in. Some have something like 1 minute consecutive viewing, some have 5 minutes cumulative. It really just depends on how they want to measure it. That's all we got. Appreciate the time. Thanks, everyone.